answer any questions if you might have.
Are you concerned that it's limited to just 2 calls?
It is limited to 2 calls, and I think that it's a great start for us as a state to provide that immunity. I think it's going to be a great start for us.
Yeah, I think we recognize that this is a step in the right direction. There is always room for more to be done, but this is definitely the right step. I do want to say, we had a lot of testimony on this bill in committee, and we heard from a young man, similar to what you just heard about. This young man was with a friend, and his friend was using and overdosing, and we were trying to get into his head, and say, what was going on? And he said, you know what? He said, I was afraid I was going to get in trouble, so I hesitated. I hesitated to call. Eventually he called, and by then it was too late, and his friend died. When you hear that kind of testimony, you have to do something. Did we get as far as we wanted to? No, we didn't. Is there room to work? Absolutely, yes. Did we do what we could? Yes. That's what we've done today. And we're proud of it, and hoping that this is something that will be built upon in further General Assembly.
Any other questions?
How many other states have this law? 35. I knew it was in the 30s.
We're 36?
Most. Most states have something.
Any other questions?
And then also, some other concerns with the bill from some advocates are that it requires police to share information, or medical personnel has to share information about the person who called, and the screening that you mentioned for treatment. Is that going to deter people who think from taking advantage of this law?
Yeah, so the first piece that you refer to is a model that's being used in Hamilton County, in Colerain Township, where EMS are going on the run. Sometimes the police officers are there and sometimes they're not. And if they're not there, that's when this part kicks in, where the EMS is providing just contact information of the individual that is overdosed to provide for a follow-up. I've been on these runs, and so what that looks like is a police officer and a social worker. The social worker is the lead on that team, and so what we're trying to do is get that individual into treatment. And so the run I went on, the stepmother answered the door. This young man had been found in the street. He had overdosed. They took him to the emergency room, to the hospital, and then he returned home. She did not know he had even been to the hospital. She didn't know any of it. And so we were out there. He was at work, and so we left the information. And so I talked to the social worker about that and said, hey, so what was the impact of what we just did right now? And she said, the thing about addiction is, oftentimes the first touch, the second touch, the third touch, it's not enough. It's an addiction, it's a disease. And so you have to go in numerous times. And so what that piece of this legislation does, and in all fairness, it originated on the Senate side, but what it does is say we need to do that follow-up to get that individual into treatment, or at least make that touch, make that attempt. And so in Hamilton County, 0 people are being arrested or convicted of anything on those follow-up visits, because I did ask the question, what is the purpose here? And the purpose is to try to get the individual into treatment. If we can get further down the road to the person that actually dealt the drugs or sold the drugs, that's icing on the cake. Treatment, though, is a very important component on this, which is why the social worker actually is the lead in that pair when that happens.
So the goal is treatment, not necessarily to get more information.
I think it's both. I think it depends on who you talk to as to what they think, where they're trying to go with that. But I will tell you, having done the run myself, treatment was the primary objective of that follow-up. And again, I think if you were to talk to Senator Seitz, he would talk more about trying to get to the person that's actually way further up the food chain in dealing with drugs or selling the drugs. But on the ground, I'm telling you, they're trying to get folks into treatment, and they feel strongly, and people, advocates will tell you that because it's an addiction, it is so hard to get these folks into treatment and have successful treatment. And so that's a huge part of the puzzle for the follow-ups. I can't remember what the second question.
It was the screening within 30 days, the screening or referral.
was shorter to begin with, and I was in Cincinnati, and I was talking to folks that are in addiction treatment, and I mentioned this to them, and I said, you know, how long is long enough? I mean, how long's too long? And the gentleman I was speaking with said, a 30-day window is reasonable, and people can generally abide by that. I think I don't remember where we started, but it was shorter than that. And so we actually lengthened the amount of time that a person has to go to that screening.
And that's a referral, not necessarily into a program.
Right, and I think, you know, one of our purposes with this law was to really save somebody's life. And we hear over and over again that you might overdose one time, but then you might come back and overdose a second or third time. We wanted to make sure that when somebody overdoses, obviously that's a life-changing experience. It opens them up to the possibilities of treatment, and so we wanted to strike while the iron was hot, make sure that they get a screening, brief intervention, referral to treatment so that they have a connection with treatment. We want to try to help them get into recovery here and help save their lives kind of on a longer horizon than just that one night as well. And then I think the second piece of this is, look, the gangs are pretty sophisticated about how they deal these drugs. They've got these runners with burner cell phones and a bottle of water where they send them out with several heroin balloons, and if they get stopped by the police department, they take the bottle of water and swallow the balloons and ingest them, and there's no way for the police to arrest them. And so it becomes very difficult for the police to work their way up their way up the chain of command for the real bad guys in this scenario, who are the drug dealers. And so if your heroin dealer just gave you a product that nearly killed you the previous evening, you might be more likely to share some information that would help us stop the supply of these drugs in our communities.
I would just like to comment on a couple of the points that you brought up. As a family member, I've waited 3 years to be able to receive immunity to call 911 for help. I see many people, I shouldn't say many, I'm one of those people that when I walk through a parking lot, I'm looking. That when I go to a gas station, I'm looking because I know what I'm looking for. When someone brings up that you only get 2 calls, right now, yesterday, I got 0. Ohio's losing at least 8 people a day. They're not just young people. We just had an event throughout Ohio that we're losing people at the age of 50, 60, 70, even 81 years old. So this applies to an entire population of Ohio. And when we're losing at least 8 a day, and you're telling me that I can only call for 2, I'm okay with that. Because yesterday I couldn't call. And when they say that now the names are getting into law enforcement, 90% of our kids' names are already in there. And it takes at least 8 to 9 times of treatment effort for our kids to get into recovery. So if this 911 bill gets them that first contact, they've only got 7 to go from that point on. What we really need to focus on is saving a life and getting long-term effective treatment for these kids. And at that point, we've done our job to save a life. But this is the step 1, and it's very important.